Hey, my name is Daniel. I'm 34. I fix things for a living. Doors, floors, broken cabinets. And until this past summer, I was just the quiet guy across the street that nobody really noticed. Then one rainy night at midnight, she knocked on my door, soaking wet, mascara running, and whispered. I didn't know who else to call. She was married. She lived in the big house across the street. In the way she said my name the first time, just once, quietly, like it cost her something, I knew I was already in trouble. We never crossed the line the way people think. But what we did was quieter than that, and somehow, harder to forget. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're from in the comments, because I still don't know if what we did was wrong. I wasn't looking for anything that summer. That's the honest truth. I had work. I had quiet. I had a small garage apartment behind a fixer-upper on Caldwell Street that I was slowly bringing back to life, one rotted board and stripped screw at a time. That was enough for me. My name is Daniel, 34 years old. Handyman since I was 19, following my father around with a tool belt before I even knew what half the tools were called. I wake up early, work with my hands, eat dinner alone most nights, fall asleep to whatever's on the kitchen radio. Simple life. Honest life. Across the narrow street sat the Whitmore house. Large, well-kept, cream-colored siding and black shutters. A brass porch light that stayed on until late most nights. The kind of house that makes you wonder what happens inside it. I'd seen her a few times in passing, loading groceries, standing in the driveway with her phone to her ear. Once, kneeling in the garden, pulling weeds in the early morning when she thought nobody was watching. She was elegant. That's the word I kept coming back to. Mid-40s, dark hair, usually pulled back. A face that had something behind it, something she wasn't saying. I didn't think about her much, or I told myself I didn't. The night she knocked, it was raining hard. I was fixing a cabinet hinge in my kitchen, crouched on the floor with a screwdriver in my hand, radio on low, thunder in the distance. I wasn't expecting anyone. The knocking was urgent, desperate, the kind that has fear behind it. I opened the door and she was standing there in the rain. Claire Whitmore. No coat, dark hair, wet and pressed against her face. A light blue blouse soaked straight through. She was trembling, not violently, but that fine trembling you get when your body is trying to hold something in. She looked at me. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then she whispered it. I didn't know who else to call. The way she said it, like those words, cost her something. I felt it somewhere in my chest before I understood what was happening. I stepped back from the door. Come in, I said. She stood in my small living room, looking slightly lost. Water dripped from her hair onto the wood floor. I got her a towel, filled a glass of water, sat across from her, and left distance between us. She told me she'd gotten a strange call from an unknown number. Panicked. Thomas was in Dallas until Thursday. She'd sat alone in that big house for an hour trying to talk herself out of coming over, and then she stopped. She knocked, I said. She nodded once. We talked carefully at first, the way two people do when they don't really know each other but are suddenly sharing a room at midnight. She asked about the renovation. I told her about the dry rot under the bathroom floor, the window frames I was rebuilding by hand. She listened like she was actually interested. Then she said something that changed the shape of the room. I used to see you on your porch in the evenings. Most nights, she paused. You're not on your phone? You're not pacing? You just sit there. She looked at her glass. I kept thinking, what must that feel like? The rain slowed. The room got quieter. We stayed in that quiet for a minute. Not uncomfortable. Just honest. It was past 1 in the morning when she finally stood to leave. At the door, she stopped, turned, and pressed her hand over mine for a moment. Warm and brief. Thank you, Daniel. I watched her walk back across the narrow street in the dark, the brass porch light waiting for her. She went inside. The door closed. I stood on my porch in the damp night air for a while before going back in. I didn't sleep much. Lucas showed up the next morning with hardwood flooring and unsolicited opinions. My older brother, louder and everything. He dropped a coffee in front of me and said, I looked like I'd slept wrong. I said I was fine. He gave me the look older brothers give. We worked most of the morning on the back bedroom floor while he talked about a difficult client in Greenwood. At some point he said, wealthy clients always want to make it personal. You keep it professional. Danny, do the work, take the check, go home. The ones who want to talk too much, that's where it gets complicated. Yeah, I said. I wasn't really listening. I was looking out the front window at Claire sorting through her mail. That afternoon, she returned the towel I'd lent her, folded neatly. We talked on the porch a few minutes. Then I noticed Mrs. Halpern moving down the sidewalk, slow enough to notice things. Her gaze rested on us a beat too long. Claire's posture shifted. I should let you get back to it. She left. And that evening, we both ended up on our separate porches at the same hour, the street quiet between us. We exchanged a small wave. Nobody crossed. That was all. But when I went inside, something in the air had shifted. The street felt different than it had a week ago. She started coming by with coffee a few mornings a week. We had a rhythm to it quickly, which surprised me. Some people you have to work at a conversation with. With Claire, the pauses didn't feel empty. I was fixing a cabinet in her kitchen when she talked about Thomas for the first time. He's gone almost 3 weeks every month, has been for years. She said it simply, like a fact she'd made peace with. I stopped expecting things to be different a while ago. Is that enough? I asked, stopping expecting things. She considered it. Some days it is. I went back to the cabinet. She went quiet. But when the hinge swung clean and silent a few minutes later, she said thank you in a tone that wasn't really about the hinge. The moment that almost cost us both started ordinary enough. I was fixing a door hinge in her upstairs hallway. She was leaning in a doorframe across from me, talking, laughing at something from a trip she'd taken years ago, somewhere in Portugal, a real laugh, surprised out of her by her own memory. When I turned from the hinge, she was closer than I'd expected. Neither of us sure who'd moved. She looked up at me, still halfway through the smile, and then rested her head briefly on my shoulder. 3 seconds, maybe 4. We both stepped back quietly, like two people pulling away from an open flame before it burns them. Sorry, she said softly. Don't be, I said. We went downstairs. She made coffee. We talked about something else. I gathered my tools and left. Walking back across the street, I kept my eyes straight ahead, but my heart wasn't. The power went out that Thursday. She showed up at my door 20 minutes into it, saw my generator light. We sat at my kitchen table by candlelight, and somewhere in the middle of a slow conversation she said, "Can I tell you something?" "Sure." The night I came over, in the rain. She turned her cup in her hands. I didn't call Thomas. My first instinct wasn't to call my husband. She looked at the table. It was to come here, and I don't know what to do with that. I let the quiet hold for a moment. You don't have to do anything with it, I said. It was a hard night. You needed somewhere to go. That's all it has to be. She nodded slowly. She didn't look convinced. Neither was I. The lights came back on without warning. The quiet broke. She stood up, paused at the door without a word, and left. I sat at the table a long time after that. Thomas came back 4 days early. We both heard the car from the back deck where I was replacing a railing section. Claire went still. That careful composure slid into place across her face. You should go, she said quietly. I went through the side yard without hurrying, came out on the sidewalk, crossed back to my place. That night, I sent her one text. Everything okay? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. I put the phone face down and went to bed. She didn't appear for 2 days. Her daughter Maya arrived home from college. I kept my distance. Lucas came by and at one point said, without looking up from the subfloor, complicated situations never announce themselves. They just take up more and more space until there's no room for anything else. I didn't respond. But that night, sitting alone on the porch, I made a decision. Whatever was forming across that narrow street, whatever I felt when she said my name, when she put her head on my shoulder, when she said, I didn't call Thomas, I was going to put it down. I was a handyman on Caldwell Street. She was Claire Whitmore. That distance wasn't just physical. I went inside and didn't look at her house again that night. I kept that decision for almost 3 weeks. That's longer than I expected, honestly. Long enough that the street started feeling normal again. Long enough that I stopped tracking the Whitmore house from the corner of my eye every time I stepped outside. Long enough that I thought maybe I'd actually done it, put the thing down, and walked away clean. Then one rainy night, I came home late from a job across town. Boots heavy with mud, shoulders aching, and I found something on my porch chair. A silk scarf, folded neatly, dark green, soft-looking, even in the low light. The kind of thing that belonged in a different life than mine. I stood there for a moment just looking at it. I knew whose it was. I picked it up, held it for a second, set it back down in the chair and went inside without letting myself think too hard about what it meant or how it got there. I showered, ate something I barely tasted, sat on the couch with the television on but not watching it. At 2:03 in the morning, my phone vibrated on the coffee table. I looked at the screen. Claire. The message was 2 words, porch light. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long moment. Long enough that the screen dimmed. I pressed it again. Read the words again. 2 words. A question. A quiet door left open, just a crack. I stood up, walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside into the damp night air. I reached back inside and turned on the porch light. Across the street, her porch light came on a minute later, and then she appeared, standing in the shadow just beyond the reach of the light, still and quiet, in a dark coat. She didn't come down the steps. Neither did I. We stood on our separate porches with the narrow street between us, and she spoke in a voice low enough that I had to be paying attention to hear it. "I didn't want to just show up again," she said. "I know. I thought the light was safer." "It is," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Across the street a car passed slowly, headlights sweeping through the dark, and we both went still until it turned the corner. "I found the scarf," I said. "I figured you left it on purpose." It wasn't really a question. She knew I knew. I didn't know how else to. She stopped. Started again. "I've been trying to figure out how to say something for 3 weeks. And I couldn't find the words. So I left the scarf instead." "What were you trying to say?" She looked at me across the street. Even at that distance, I could see the steadiness in her. The way she didn't look away. "I'm sorry," she said, "for making things complicated, for the hallway, for all of it." "You don't owe me an apology, Claire." "Maybe not." A pause, but I needed to give one anyway. The neighborhood was completely still around us. No curtains moving, no dogs, no distant traffic. Just the hum of 2 porch lights and the space between them. "How are things?" I asked. She considered the question honestly. "Complicated. Thomas. He noticed something was different." She said it carefully. "Not anything specific. Just different. He always could read a room, even when he barely spent time in it." I didn't say anything. "Maya goes back on Sunday," she added. "The house gets quiet again. I know how that feels." She smiled slightly. I could just make it out from where I was standing. "I know you do. That's part of why I left the scarf." We talked like that for a while. Nothing dramatic. The kind of conversation that fills a late night without rushing anywhere. She told me Maya had asked about the renovation across the street, whether the handyman was good. Claire had said, "Very good," and left it at that. I told her about a job I'd done that week, a woman in the next neighborhood over, who had a kitchen that hadn't been touched since the 70s. Avocado green tiles. Claire laughed at that. A quiet laugh, and the sound of it carried across the street and landed somewhere in my chest. Around 3 in the morning, she said she should get inside. "Yeah," I said. She didn't move right away. "Is this all right? His arrangement?" I thought about it. Standing on our porches, talking at 3 in the morning. Something like that. "It's all right," I said. She nodded once. Then she went inside. I stood on my porch for another few minutes after her light went off, listening to the night settle back into silence. Then I went in too. It became a routine. Not every night, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Always late, after 10, sometimes closer to midnight. One of us would turn on the porch light first. The other would see it and come outside. We never planned it ahead of time, never texted to arrange it. The light was the signal. That was enough. We talked about everything and nothing. Books she'd read. Houses I'd worked on. A trip Thomas was planning that she hadn't been invited to join. A piece of the renovation I was proud of. The original crown molding in the front room that I'd spent 2 weekends restoring by hand. She asked good questions, the kind that made you think before answering. And she listened the way people listen when they're actually trying to understand something, not just waiting for their turn to speak. I started looking forward to those nights more than I wanted to admit. One evening after work, I caught myself on the drive home, wondering if she'd put the light on. I noticed myself noticing that, and I sat with the uncomfortable honesty of it for a few miles before I pulled onto Caldwell Street. The light was on. Thomas left again on a Tuesday. I watched his car back out of the driveway early morning. That same confident reversal. The kind of man who moves through the world without looking behind him. The car disappeared around the corner. The streets settled back into quiet. That afternoon, Claire came over for the first time in weeks. Not to the porch, to the door. She knocked with those same 2 knuckles she always used. And when I opened it, she was standing there with 2 cups of coffee and a look on her face like she wasn't entirely sure she should have come. "He'll be gone 10 days, she said. Like I'd asked. "Okay," I said, and stepped back from the door. She came in and sat at my kitchen table, and we drank our coffee while the afternoon light moved across the floor. She noticed things about the apartment, small changes I'd made since she'd last been inside. New shelf above the window. The cabinet I'd finally finished staining. "It's starting to feel like a real home," she said. "It was always real," I said. "Just needed some attention." She looked at me then with an expression I couldn't fully read. Something thoughtful in it. Something a little sad. "I think a lot of things are like that," she said quietly. I didn't answer, but I understood what she meant. The days she spent in my apartment during those 10 days were simple ones. She helped me sand down the trim in the front room one afternoon, which she insisted on, even though I told her she didn't have to. She was terrible at it at first, pressing too hard, going against the grain, and I had to show her the right way. guiding her hand lightly along the wood. She was a quick learner. We made dinner once, late in the week. She brought groceries, which felt significant without either of us saying so. She cooked while I cleaned up the workshop in the back room. And when I came into the kitchen, the smell of garlic and something warm stopped me in the doorway. She was standing at my stove with her hair loose, no jewelry, wearing one of my old flannel shirts she'd grabbed off the hook near the door because she didn't want to get her blouse dirty. She was stirring something and humming very quietly, and she didn't know I was there yet. I stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked more comfortable than I'd ever seen her. More like herself, somehow, than she looked in her own large house across the street. That scared me a little. "Smells good," I said. She turned and smiled. "Don't get used to it." But there was something in how she said it that made it sound like an invitation as much as a warning. We ate at the small kitchen table. We talked until late, and when she finally gathered herself to leave, she stood at the door and looked at me for a moment before going. "This feels like the most normal I've felt in a long time," she said. "Normal's underrated," I said. She smiled, stepped outside, walked back across the narrow street. I stood in the doorway and watched until the Whitmore house swallowed her back up. The last night before Thomas returned, we sat on my porch together. She'd come over late, around 9, and we'd ended up outside because the night was too warm to stay in. The neighborhood was quiet. Mrs. Halpern's lights were already off. The street was ours. She sat in the other porch chair, the one that was usually empty, with her knees pulled slightly toward her chest and her head tipped back, looking at the sky. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked. Not looking at me, still looking at the sky. "Caldwell Street. Anywhere you've been?" "Starting somewhere, nobody knows you." "Sometimes," I said. "When I was younger, more." "What stopped you?" I thought about it. Nothing stopped me. I just realized that wherever you go too. The thing you're trying to leave is usually inside. She was quiet for a while. "That's annoyingly wise," she said. I laughed. She did too. Then she said, "Thomas comes back tomorrow." I know. She didn't say anything more about it. She didn't have to. We both understood what tomorrow meant. The porches at midnight, the quiet dinners, the flannel shirt. All of it would have to breathe differently. Again, live in a smaller space, be more careful. She stayed until almost midnight. When she stood to leave, she looked at me in that way. She had direct and careful at the same time, like she was measuring something. "Daniel," she said. "Yeah, whatever this is." She stopped. "Try it again. I don't regret any of it." I looked at her in the dark. The porch light was behind her, and her face was in soft shadow, and she was so honest in that moment that it was almost hard to look at. "Neither do I said. She nodded once, walked down the porch steps, crossed the narrow street slowly, like she wasn't in a hurry to get to the other side. I watched her go. I always watched her go. Thomas came back the next afternoon. I heard his car from the back of the house, and felt the shift in the air, the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm. The street realigned itself around his presence. The Whitmore house closed back up. That evening, I sat on my porch alone. I expected it to feel like losing something. But it didn't feel like that, exactly. It felt more like the tide going out, that natural pulling back, the understanding that this was how it worked, that the water would come back in its own time. Across the street, one room light in the Whitmore house glowed warm behind white curtains. I could see two shadows moving around inside, living the life they'd built, or what remained of it, carrying what they carried. I picked up my drink and looked at the street for a while. Weeks went by. Months, almost. The renovation moved forward. The front porch finally stopped sagging. I refinished the floors in the main room and stood in the doorway afterward, just looking at them, the grain of the wood catching the late afternoon light, and felt something close to pride. Lucas came by and walked through the whole house and said it was starting to look like something. Coming from Lucas, that was significant. Thomas traveled. Claire stayed. The porch light routine continued when it could, less frequent now, more careful. Some weeks I wouldn't see her for 5 or 6 days, and then the light would come on at 11 at night and I'd go outside and she'd be there across the street. And we'd talk until the neighborhood was fully asleep. We'd never cross that line again, not the way we'd almost crossed it in the hallway. Maybe because we both understood what it would cost. Maybe because what we had felt fragile enough already without testing it further. Maybe because the porches and the distance and the soft conversations in the dark were enough worth, in fact, more than either of us had expected to find. One night she told me that she and Thomas were talking about things. Working on something, she said, vaguely. I didn't ask for more than she offered. "Is that what you want?" I asked. She thought about it for a long time. "I want to want it," she said. "I think that counts for something." "It does," I said, and I meant it. I wanted good things for her, even the ones that had nothing to do with me. That, I realized, was the truest thing I could say about how I felt. The last night of summer, I sat on the finished porch and looked at the house I'd been rebuilding for almost a year. It was done, or close enough. New trim, sealed windows, refinished floors, a porch that no longer sagged on one side. It looked like the house it had always been trying to be underneath all the neglect. I had coffee. The air had that first hint of autumn coolness in it, the kind that reminds you time keeps moving whether you're paying attention or not. I wasn't looking across the street, but after a while, I noticed the light. Her porch light was on. And then she appeared, same as always, standing just at the edge of the glow. Dark coat, hair loose tonight. She lifted one hand in a small wave. I lifted mine back. We didn't talk. Too far, maybe, or maybe we didn't need to. The light said enough. The gesture said enough. After a few minutes, she went inside. After a few minutes, I did too. I don't know exactly what we were to each other. I've thought about it enough that I've stopped needing an answer. Some things don't fit the words people have made for them. Some things live in the space between what you say and what you mean, between what you do and what you choose not to do. She was a woman across a narrow street who came to my door one rainy night because she didn't know who else to call, and I was the man who turned on the porch light. That's the whole story, and also almost none of it. Some nights I still sit outside after work and the street is quiet and the Whitmore house is lit up across the way. Some nights the porch light comes on over there and I go outside and we talk across the dark, the way we always did. Careful, warm, to people who learned the exact shape of the line between them. Some nights the light just stays on. And on those nights, that's enough. If this story stayed with you, you're not alone. Subscribe and turn on notifications and new story posts every week. And if you know someone who needed to hear this tonight, send it to them.